Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Aviation Futures Webinar, identifying Europe's sustainable aviation landscape and uncovering the ReFuel Aviation Initiative. My name is Harry, a content producer at Sustainable Aviation Futures, a global series of aviation decarbonisation conferences. This webinar will highlight and establish the aviation industry's pathway to net zero. Given the exciting news that's being announced this week in the ReFuel EU policies, this has come as perfect timing. The webinar is an insight into the kind of discussions that will be taking place at Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress. Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress Europe, a high-level congress uncovering prospects, innovations and strategies to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, taking place in Amsterdam on the 7th to the 9th of June. The three-day event features a pre-event workshop day, uncovering the latest regulation and policy in Europe, following two main conference days, featuring keynotes looking to address the emerging sustainability strategies being developed from airlines, governments, OEMs and fuel producers, as well as providing a panorama of the aviation decarbonisation landscape. The afternoon is split into streams to deep dive into SAF production, green airports, corporate sustainability, and non-CO2 emissions, as well as future flight and green airline operations. Further details regarding the event can be found in an email provided at the end. Before we go into the discussion, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do ensure that you keep yourselves on mute. You already should be. If there is enough time at the end, there'll be a Q&A. Please put all questions into the Zoom Q&A function. Marina, the moderator for today's session, will then select some and read them out at the end. I'm very pleased to announce the 6 speakers today will be joining us, participants at Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress, and it is my pleasure to welcome Arvid Locken from Avinor, Jan Markus Lukov from DPDHL Group, Istvan Bart from EDF, Frank Mischler from PTX Hub Brussels, and Jonathan Wood from Neste. Finally, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's session, Marina Efthimiou. Marina is an associate professor in aviation management and the course director for MSc Aviation Leader and graduate in Aviation Sustainability, Leadership and Innovation at Dublin City University. Before this, she worked at the University of West London and also Eurocontrol. I will hand over to Marina now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I would also like to welcome you to our panel discussion. Thank you, Sustainable Aviation Futures, for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's a great honor to be here today. This webinar brings together a group of experts who provide their unique perspectives and insights on a very topical and also very important for aviation's decarbonization topic. We hope that it will help you develop a better understanding on the topic and give you insights about the forthcoming conference in Amsterdam. Without further ado, I would like to welcome all panelists today. I will be starting with Jan Markus. Jan Markus, if you can unmute yourself and say a few words about you and your expertise.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you, Marina, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jan Lukov. I work at corporate development at Deutsche Post DHL Group. I'm part of the Clean Operations Office team, and we essentially oversee the decarbonization roadmap for the whole group. My personal main focus is sustainable aviation, and as such, of course, mainly sustainable aviation fuels, and I advise on different strategic issues internally, such as technical development feedstocks, policy and regulation, and concepts such as book and claim. And furthermore, I also cover some additional topics related to sustainable aviation, such as contrary mitigations and such. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Jana. We'll have a lot to learn from you today. So I'm going to move to Arvid. Arvid, if you can unmute yourself and say a few words.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I work in Avinor's sustainability department, mainly with SAF focal point. We are a state-owned organization operating 43 airports in Norway, a long country, lots of fjords and terrain, lots of airports. So aviation is really important for us. And we work to reduce our own emissions from airport operations, but also as a catalyst to reduce emissions from aviation itself. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Arvid. I think we also have a lot to learn from Norway. I'm going to move to Frank. Frank?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Frank Mischler. I'm one of the directors of the Power to X Hub, which is implemented by GIZ. Our mandate is to support developing and emerging countries worldwide on their quest to use hydrogen and power to X for their development path. And in many countries, aviation is a major factor, and we'll get to that today in this webinar.
Thanks, Frank. I hope you're also going to bring perspectives outside of Europe. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to Istvan. Hello, Istvan. You're on mute, Istvan.
Yes, my name is Istvan Bart. I'm working for the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, and I'm mainly an emissions trading expert, having worked in the European Commission and at the Hungarian government and various NGOs. And right now, I am developing the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Certificate Registry.
Fantastic, Istvan. And I'm sure you're going to explain a bit more what that means later on.
Yes,
so,
I hope to do that. Yeah.
Last but not least, Jonathan.
Yes, hello everybody. Glad to be here. I'm currently responsible as a vice president for the building of our renewable aviation business at Neste. I've been in the energy and fuels and latterly the last 10 years in the aviation fuel space and low carbon fuels, or SAF, have been absolutely central to that. Neste is the world's largest producer of renewable fuels and circular solutions, and as we speak is opening up an expansion of our Singapore plant with an additional 1 million tons of SAF coming, production capacity coming on stream literally as we speak. So have been responsible for our EMEA business and now globally for our commercial supply.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So let's not wait anymore. Let's start from the beginning. So very recently we have the Refuel EU initiative being approved. So Jan, if you don't mind, I will start with you. I wonder, what are the key obligations outlined in the Refuel EU and SAF suppliers and industry stakeholders are expected to fulfill with regards to SAF supply and uplift?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. Thank you. So we had an informal agreement this week on Refuel EU Aviation in the trilogue in Brussels. This is still not an adopted final text. This is still outstanding, but well, we think that the provisions that are provided here in the final trilogue are what we're going to see in the final text as well. So let me just give a brief overview and go over the main things, especially the blending mandate here. I'll have my notes here right beside me so I don't mess up any numbers. We will start with the blending mandate in 2025. It's going to be a 2% volume-based SAF blending mandate. And notably, there will be no sub-quota for e-fuels or power-to-liquid fuels in 2025. This will only kick in 2030. In 2030, we'll have a 6% blending mandate on SAF in general and a 1.2% blending mandate or sub-quota mandate on e-fuels. And then this is going to be ramped up continuously until 2050. There's a rather huge jump in 2035, where we'll go to 20% of SAF and 5% sub-quota of e-fuels. And then eventually this is going to go up until 2050 to 70% of SAF and a 35% blend of e-fuels. Now, maybe briefly covering what the possibilities in fuels are that are eligible to fulfill these mandates. Of course, this is synthetic aviation fuels, so e-fuels or power-to-liquid fuels, sometimes also referred to as RFNBOs. And the other big part is going to be aviation biofuels and recycled carbon aviation fuels. So essentially power-to-liquid fuels where the CO2 source is not from biogenic sources, but rather from, for example, industrial point sources. So it's essentially fossil CO2 that is being used twice. And it's also possible to have renewable hydrogen in the mix here in the long run. Maybe one last note that I'll make here is that in the biofuel sector, you can basically use everything that is in the Renewable Energy Directive 2 Annex 9. So these are the feedstocks that are allowed. And most of the other feedstocks are allowed as well, with a few exceptions. So this is quite important for most producers actually, and also for us as an off-taker. Food and feed crops are not allowed, and also intermediate crops are an exception, as well as some other things. But yeah, these are probably the most outstanding that we have to take a look at.
Thank you very much, Jan. So we'll see a lot of changes in the aviation landscape, and I'm sure we're going to be discussing more on that on the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress later on in Amsterdam. We have heard a lot about the biomass, biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels, and lately we hear more and more about the synthetic fuels. So I think there is still a learning gap in the synthetic fuels, and having Jonathan here, I would like to take the opportunity and ask him what is the state of the art in the synthetic fuels, and how is the industry preparing to cover the blending requirements specified by the ReFuelEU?
Okay, yes. So building on what Jan has just outlined in terms of the EU policy proposals, which now look like they will be enacted. And it's worth noting also that the UK is heading down a broadly similar pathway with a supplier obligation. And indeed also the US or North America is progressing, albeit with slightly different mechanisms, also to target a growth in the use of SAF up to indeed 10% usage by 2030, both in the UK and US. So then coming to where eSAF or power to liquids fits into this picture. So as many of the listeners will be aware, Neste is the largest producer of SAF today and of renewable fuels more generally. And typically we use the so-called HEFA or hydrotreated esters and fatty acids production process using waste oils and fats and other waste bio-based oils. Now, that can certainly be expanded and will be expanded and scaled up to meet the targets that are being set by policymakers as well as by the market, certainly for 2025 and through the decade. But by 2030, as is now evidenced by the EU policy, we definitely need to be have developed production capacity that can supply this eSAF or renewable power-based synthetic fuel. Where we're at on that right now is you've got one or the other pilot scale plant being developed, projects with startup companies, projects that are often actually even supported and by larger oil companies such as Neste and the larger oil majors. But they are all at the present at I'd say a pilot or trial scale, 5, 10, 20,000 ton kind of scale plants. And we clearly need to develop the technology, improve the cost efficiency and capital efficiency. And that's what I fully anticipate over the next 5 years, so that by the late 2020s, this production capacity is coming on stream. Neste is certainly, just like the industry as a whole, actively working with our R&D team on one or the other power to liquid project. In most cases, I think this will require different companies to collaborate together, because you have to have renewable power, you have to have a carbon source, a significant carbon source, because that's not easily transported. You then have to have the, I'll call it refining technology expertise and operating expertise to then convert it into a liquid fuel. So I think the industry is demonstrating the willingness to work together and collaborate to bring these projects on stream in the late 2020s. But it probably will cost significantly more than current SAF, or for that matter, current price levels for fossil jet fuel. But that's unfortunately a price we have to pay, I think. But as we scale up, I'm sure the costs and the technology and economies of scale will be improved and help improve the cost curve.
Jonathan, I think we hear you loud and loud here. Clear and loud here. You raised some very important points. You raised the point of collaboration, the need to support the production capacity, and also that in the synthetic fuels we're in a phase of trial and startups and trying to innovate. And when I hear the word innovation, the first thing that comes to mind, at least for me as an academic, is the policy support. So we have seen in SAF, in sustainable biofuels, that without regulatory support, it will remain an underinvested private sector with lacking skills and capacity, as well as high uncertainty. So we have seen over the years supply and technology push and market pull types of policies around the world. So how do you see the policy intervention supporting the scaling up of SAF production and investment and mitigating associated risks? That was a very long question there.
If you want me to give a first response, I mean, I think the sub mandate is as good a tool as any to help encourage the development of this nascent technology, and especially because it's higher cost, it inevitably will be hard to compete against the other alternative forms of SAF that are becoming to market. So I think that's the right way to go. But in time, it needs to be able to compete. All the different production technologies, technology pathways, and feedstock sources need to compete with one another, and ultimately the market needs to be the judge as to which are the ones that can be most effectively scaled up in the most cost-efficient way. But I mean, this plus also seed funding support, support on backing of loans and the like are, I think, and I know the EU has got a fund to support exactly this kind of green hydrogen-based future economy. So I think those are the tools that are the right tools to help progress the development of this eSAF capability.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So if we had a message for the regulators, that will be to support innovation in order to decarbonize air transport. You raised another point there. You raised the point of feedstock. So if I could ask Arvid's opinion on if you can provide an overview of the current feedstock challenges for SAF production and supply, and how can the aviation industry address those challenges and ensure a consistent and highlight consistent SAF supply?
Yeah, thank you, Marina. I guess I'd start by quoting Kennedy. We're not doing this because it is easy. I mean, it's going to be a major challenge. And the Refuel EU Aviation is really a game changer. We're going to move from it all being fossil until 70% of it being sustainable aviation fuels. And we're going to need, I think it's about 50 billion liters of SAF only in Europe. It's the latest SAF estimate from Sky Energy. And with this week's announcement of 70% in 2050, I guess the estimate is even higher. And as Jonathan touched upon, HEFA is not going to take us all the way. Used cooking oil and animal fats is in limited supply. So all serious projections point to other feedstocks, other technologies, other resources being needed. So we need to mature more technologies, more pathways, more feedstocks. And I guess what we see coming up is side streams from forestry, municipal solid waste and other waste streams like waste plastics coming into the equation. And then power to liquid, RFNBOs, e-fuels also being quite important. And I guess every nation kind of needs to develop its own strategy here. I mean, we've in Norway 10 years ago we started looking into, I mean, where will these feedstocks come from? Where will we find resources? Side streams from forestry could cover 30-40% of the need in Norwegian aviation, we found out. And after that, we've been looking into e-fuels as an opportunity for Norway with high renewable share. That's definitely a place where we could invest, and Norway is in a better position than most other countries. But also, I mean, looking into what kind of waste resources do we have? I mean, municipal solid waste, how it's handled today, can some of those resources, can some of the plastics resources go into kind of fueling aviation for the future? So I think there is a need to develop strategies in different regions with different kind of resources available.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Arvid. I think you raised another important point there, that we need to develop different strategies in different countries, and especially for countries that they want to diversify the reliance and build a little bit on an energy security perspective. I have a PhD student who works on demand and supply of SAF, and numerous times we are discussing the elements of competition from other means of transportation for getting access to feedstock. Then, as other panelists also mentioned now, the element of collaboration and cooperation and having this kind of policy behind the development of SAF, it's very important. So Frank, I know that you have been doing some fantastic work and you have been involved in policy dialogues and international collaboration on various projects. So I wonder if you can share some insights from sustainable aviation fuel production in Brazil and Kenya projects.
Or around the globe. Indeed.
Or around the globe, even better.
Well, let's start with the point that Arvid stressed. Well, there is a physical limitation for HEFA and biofuel production for kerosene. So PTL SAF is really the way to go. That's very early stages. And as Jonathan also stressed, we are at the beginning, we see relatively small plants, mostly in Europe and the US. And if you look at the Eneratech plant that was launched like a month ago in Höchst, close to Frankfurt, they put it at 7 megawatt electrolyzer capacity, if I'm not incorrect. And the limiting factor was indeed the carbon source. And I guess, well, Jonathan's nodding, so this will be the limiting factor in many places in Europe. So it is quite natural to look elsewhere in countries that have better condition for renewable energy and also better access to a sustainable carbon source that is that complies with the Refuel Aviation and well, the EU regulations in general. So we are supporting numerous countries, not only the two that you mentioned. And I'm very happy to say that in Morocco, we now secured funding for a demonstration plan. It's very small, it's 1 megawatt only, but it's scalable and it's very important for the country to learn the technology and then to go on the pathway to produce more and more SAF, because with the industry target of the EU, they calculated that they have a real convincing business case. It may be even more so in a country like Brazil or Colombia or Kenya or Namibia that have huge amounts of carbon sources. Maybe Brazil is the best positioned here. And we work in Brazil for many, many years. And I think with the EU regulations, it's becoming more and more of a convincing business case. So I think those countries will move ahead quite a bit. The question is, shall they transport their PTL SAF to Europe, or is there a better solution? But maybe we can discuss book and claim here in that webinar as well. I would have something to say on that. But back to you, Marina.
Oh, maybe back to you, Frank. Maybe you can explain the book and claim system.
Well, the book and claim system, I guess our audience knows that it's not a mass balance system, so you don't transport the kerosene physically from the site of production to the airport, but you rather use it as close as possible to the production site, but then use a book and claim system to claim the green certificate. So you would produce maybe PTL SAF in, say, Colombia, use it there in a what's the airline of Colombia? Sorry, a Colombian Airlines flight. Hope it exists.
Avianca.
Avianca, say that's true. Yes, the oldest airline, older than KLM. I learned, but then have KLM or Air France or Lufthansa claim it, so they pay the green premium. And this is the way to go and exactly the kind of stimulus that those countries I listed actually need. I do know that the actual transport doesn't add too much to the overall price, but from an environmental point, it makes so much more sense to use it on site and use a book and claim system. Yeah, and that would really give the right signal to project developers in Brazil, Kenya, and all the countries. And so we are, as the PDX Hub, support book and claim systems as much as possible for us. We are not a registry, but we would come with the expertise of those countries and the real demand of those countries.
Thank you very much, Frank. I would like to stay a little bit more on this topic because it's a very important topic. And I would like to pass to our next panelist, Istvan. Istvan, I would like your opinion and your perspective here on how can those mechanisms for the book and claim system can be leveraged to increase the SAF uptake in the aviation sector in a logistically feasible and cost-efficient way.
Well, thank you very much, and I would like to greet everyone. Basically, I think what's important to understand from SAF that it's already, in a way, it is happening. I represent SABA, which is the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, which is basically a bunch of companies, mostly big companies like Netflix, Meta, Microsoft, etc., and some airlines like United and Alaska, who are joining together to create joint procurement of SAF in order to increase the uptake of SAF or to increase demand. And one of the most important things is that this alliance brings in the end users. So that's why like Microsoft is there, because they, at least in the US context, they want to prove that their corporate flights are made with biofuels. But of course, naturally, this doesn't mean that every Microsoft employee carries the gallons of SAF with them to put into the plane that they are boarding. But it works precisely on this book and claim sort of solution. And with the introduction of the end users, the advantage is that we are able to find another revenue stream. So the end users like Microsoft, they are contributing to the payment of the green premium, and that is basically the fundamental logic of SABA. And all this is currently in the process of being implemented in the form of a registry, where fuel suppliers will be able to issue their units, the units that are representing their SAF, and this SAF will be turned into essentially two certificates: one Scope 1 certificate that the airline would be able to surrender, and one Scope 3 certificate that the end users would be able to use. And all these would be fully tradable around by the public. And that's, of course, the advantage of this is that we create hopefully a much more liquid market with more transparency around the claims and the availability of units and etc. So that's what's happening. And the reason why we're able to do that is because book and claim already has the legal basics. So the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials has already written a book and claim manual, which was finalized this March. ISO is also working on a book and claim manual. I think ISCC is also. So, the rules are fairly established by now. I mean, obviously they will be changing eventually, but we sort of know what we need to do. And there are multiple registry operations, like registry development operations. There is Shell's Avilia, which is already running. It's more of a closed system, as I understand, for Shell's clients. RSB is also developing its own little registry function that will have less tradability than ours. And the SAFC registry, which we are developing, which I hope you will find that it's the best and the most usable of all, is going to start sometime around September the 23rd. And just to give you a size of, so September 2023, and just to give you a size of how much tons of CO2 savings we are talking about. This SABA project has already managed to procure high integrity SAF that resulted in about 7,000 tons of CO2 savings. And we are planning to do about 800,000 more savings over the next, in the next procurement business. So, all this is basically really happening and coming to a theater near you.
Thank you very much, Istvan. That's very interesting. I would like to invite any of the other panelists if they have something that they want to add to what Istvan just said.
Yeah, if I may add to it, you're right that at present SAF is available at a growing number of airports, but not all airports. It's worth noting that in the 2030s, if we achieve the kind of target levels where we're setting in Europe and elsewhere, 20% by the mid-2030s of all fuel needing to be SAF, which on a blended basis is probably half of all the fuel consumed globally, then we're anyway going to have to make the product available in more locations. And that's the beauty of SAF as a drop-in fuel. It doesn't need any new aircraft or airport infrastructure or supply chain infrastructure. It can be brought there. So the challenge comes back to scaling up the production capability and working out how to do that in the most efficient way possible. And it may well be, as was mentioned by Frank, that carbon and low cost renewable power can be used from other regions of the world, and then it's a question as to how do you aggregate that in the most efficient way possible to convert it into renewable fuel or SAF. And the other thing I would just like to add to what Ishvan was explaining very well is what's also something we need to be very aware of as we hopefully successfully generate additional end customer demand, which can certainly help add impetus and help fund the additional cost for the emission reduction that's being generated by SAF, is to make sure that it is truly additional, that this is SAF that would otherwise not have been bought, or renewable fuel that would not have otherwise been used to meet some mandate obligation, whether in the aviation sector or, for that matter, in the road transportation sector. So I think this is something that the end customer really needs to be aware of: is what exactly are they buying? What is indeed being made available? Is it truly an additional emission reduction, or something that anyway was required by local legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may get back on this, we are at SABA very aware of this, the need for regulatory additionality. And we make sure that, first of all, the fuel that we actually buy, or, we organize our clients to buy, that's always fuel that was not generated for a compliance purpose. And also the SAFC registry, which will be able to, sort of provide issuance for a broad range of certificates or broad range of SAF, it will provide this information. So you will be able to know. And of course, also, if it is a compliance SAF, then you will not be able to generate the Scope 3 unit. That's that's one of the fundamental limitations we put in to make sure that we are additional. But I think, it's worth reminding ourselves that all this, playing with 2 units and all that might sound a bit fishy, but it's important to understand that the aviation sector is unique among all sectors in carbon because it has a cast iron baseline. Like, we always know how much CO2 we are saving because we always know that under any circumstances that would have been jet fuel, right? So, there is never a concern. It's very hard to find an industry that is able to provide such a rigorously standardized baseline where you can sort of be absolutely sure that this is the amount of CO2 that we have managed to save with this particular fuel.
Thanks, Istvan. You mentioned earlier on the end users. So I think the airline's perspective, the aircraft operator perspective is very important. So I would like to ask Jan, do you reckon, and I want your honest response here, do you reckon that the book and claim system works well, or do you have any areas of improvement to recommend as a user?
Both. So it's book and claim is a very important topic to us as an end user and also as a logistic provider and then cargo forwarder. And we are really happy that this has also been reflected in the ReFuelEU Aviation regulation that we saw this week. In that case, it's called SAF flexibility mechanism, and it's going to be, viable for at least 10 years because, as Jonathan rightfully pointed out, in the end, we probably won't need that because SAF is going to be everywhere. But to kickstart this market, we just need some flexibility. It doesn't make sense to bring 2% of SAF to each and every small airport in Europe in 2025. So this is very promising. However, The details are not published yet, so this is on the part of the European Commission to really define the details of this flexibility mechanism until June next year. So we'll see what they come up with, because the devil is really in the details. You've already seen the discussion quickly goes into technical details, and this is very important because we need to avoid things such as double counting and so on. It's very, very important to have a strong setup, but it gets complex rather quickly, especially if more parties come into the mix. We see that in our case as a forwarder. So we have, for example, another airline that can claim scope 1. And then for us as a forwarder, we are an intermediary between the airline and the shipper. So you have actually two entities, the forwarder and the shipper, that reported scope 3 in the first place. And of course, then they would need to reduce scope 3 when SAF is used. So there's still an ongoing debate on how freely tradable are these certificates really, and to what extent do they have to pass along the value chain step by step. We see that is still ongoing and heavily debated in some discussions, and this is something that we need to come to a conclusion on rather quickly, I believe.
Istvan, I know you want to jump in there and you're very eager to give a response, but similarly, I'm very eager to hear the airport's perspective. So we have heard what the aircraft operators are thinking. So now I would like to pass to Istvan and then to Arvill, and then I will come back to you, Istvan, for a response on that. So Arvill, you are, the floor is yours, if you can share your views.
Thank you, Marina. Yes, an airport operator, I mean, we're here for the long term and trying to be a bit a spider in the web and kind of connect different kinds of stakeholders. And we've been working with increasing production in Norway and also increasing uptake. And on the uptake side, we see the mandate coming, possibly Norway also jumping to the kind of European level and conditions from 2025. But on top of that, I mean, we see a great potential for voluntary uptake on top of mandated levels. And I really believe that, I mean, when we get these systems in place, when we get it transparent, approved by auditors, full chain of custody kind of in place here, and when we have had some front runners using these systems, I think the big volumes can come also on voluntary uptake. But we need bulletproof systems. We need transparency. There can be kind of no faults, no fraud, no failure in it. And I also see for other segments. I mean, for cargo, as was touched upon. And also for helicopter, I mean, for offshore helicopter, for example, those are big sectors in Norway, helicopter and offshore. Price sensitivity could be different in those segments, and dynamics for voluntary uptake could be different from the kind of the normal, the ordinary market. Yeah.
Thanks, Arvill. Istvan, you want to respond? You want to add something? You're on mute.
Well, I just wanted to add to what Jan has said, that the issue of the freight forwarders is something that we are trying to address in our registry. So in the SAFC registry, it will be possible to retire basically both for the end user and the freight forwarder, and we hope it will work. I mean, that's our solution, and we very much hope that the market will like that. And also, I would like to point out that in my understanding, the SAF flexibility mechanism that is in the ReFuelEU is not really a book and claim, because I think that's basically what will happen. As an ex-commission official, I think the way I would implement it is to aggregate, all the sales, and then just get reports of all the sales of SAF within that of a fuel provider for the entire Europe. I don't think that they will have to sort of move hypothetical sales from one point to another. Which would be sort of a book and claim. Yeah.
Thanks, Isvan. I think that the book and claim has gained a lot of attention in the audience here. We have a lot of questions around it. Most of them, I was going through the questions, most of them have been addressed through the discussion, and I would like to thank all the experts for that very much. There is one question from the audience. So the question is, can a company claim a Scope 1 reduction through the book and claim system for SAF, recognized by the Greenhouse Gases Protocol corporate guidance?
Well, Jan could answer that maybe as well, but an airline, when burning, or an aircraft operator, when burning the SAF, is effectively achieving a Scope 1 reduction. And the Scope 3 benefit is then for the end customer, whose supply chain comprises some form of aviation, transportation or travel.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Please keep the questions coming. They're very important also for the Congress later on. I know that Harry here is collecting all of them. So I have another question from the audience. The question is, what is required of the engine makers and airframers, if anything, to ensure the swift uptake of SAF? And does increasing SAF blending mean that the fuel cost will be permanently higher for airlines, raising ticket prices and inevitably slowing growth? Jonathan,
I can offer a first input. So at present, as I think many listeners will know, the approvals only permit up to a 50% blend of SAF with fossil jet fuel. And that's because of certain attributes, ironically, attributes which are highly beneficial in terms of lower particulate and aromatic content, which actually reduce the non-CO2 negative impacts like contrail formation and the like, but have certain properties which are helpful to the current engine technology. So we need to work with the OEMs and see if we can develop the aircraft technology, engine technology, such that it can take a higher blend ratio. And I'm confident, together with the fuel producers such as Neste and others, we'll find a way forward through that during this decade, such that it doesn't become, if you like, a glass ceiling. It doesn't cap the growth, because clearly, you know, the EU targets are setting out 70% SAF usage. So clearly we've got to break through this blend ratio approval limit that's currently in place. I hope that answers at least some of the question.
Thanks, Jonathan. If I can also add some views on this here on my own, who have done some research in the past looking at the policy for demand and supply for SAF, and then obviously SAF is far more expensive than fossil fuel, 3-4 times more. But as we see with the ReFuelEU, creating this guarantee for the suppliers that the SAF is going to be uptaken, and also looking at how the innovation is moving on and scaling up the production will create economies of scale, inevitably later on reducing the cost for SAF. So it's a little bit tricky to say how things will play out when we don't really know how the fossil fuel price will be, and thinking that 30% of the operating cost for an airline is fuel, it might lead to some increases in the prices. But observing the prices, and I can say that as an independent person, observing the prices around Europe, it's insane having a flight from Dublin, where I'm located, to Luton for €5. So increasing that slightly will not make a significant difference. Increasing that, though, by 4 or 5 times does lead to some degrowth. Then if we look at the competition for the market for the airlines, as long as the cost and the market conditions are the same for the airlines, it's not going to lead to significant monopolies, which inevitably later on will change the prices. So it is a possibility, but with the scaling up and the right form of policy, hopefully things like that will be avoided. I don't know if any of the other speakers or Jan here wants to add something on that.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, and it's a good point that you made, that you really have to look at the green premium. So this depends on a lot of factors. If we see rising prices for fossil fuels due to shortages or even taxes on carbon, for example, then it's going to be a lot more attractive to use SAF in the future. It's very hard to estimate from today's perspective. Right now, as you said, it is more expensive, and it's going to stay that way for quite some time. And what we really need is, you know, along with regulation, as we've seen this week, some sort of, you know, governmental and federal state aid and just incentives to basically smoothen the transition so that we are not, thrown in the deep end here, but have a transition into a more sustainable future of aviation. I think this is worthwhile pointing out.
Thank you very much. We have another question here. Can you elaborate more on what is allowed for recycled carbon fuels? They will only be allowed until 2040, according to the EU regulation, and the fuel in question, SAF, will still need to meet the 70% greenhouse gas reduction threshold. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. That is correct to my knowledge. So the delegated acts to the RED II have defined that at least most of the CO2 industrial point sources will be phased out around 2035 and 2040, depending on a few factors. So this is really something that we are currently taking a good look at, because as some other panelists have also pointed out, it's the CO2 source is really key when talking about power to liquid fuels or e-fuels. The discussion often revolves a lot about sustainable energy and photovoltaics, and then wind energy and hydrogen production, and this is important as well. But CO2 sources are really important here, since these are projects that usually run 20-25 years. And if you have to switch CO2 source in the middle of your project, it's really hard to kind of deal with that risk in the midst of your project. So we actually expect most people going through sources that will be valid through 2040, just to mitigate this project risk that they otherwise would have to deal with and get their banks to believe that this is something that they can mitigate.
Thank you very much for the excellent input, Jan. Jonathan, do you want to add something there?
I just want to reinforce what Jan has said. I mean, if it's not obvious to everybody, an investment project, you're talking $1 billion plus, you're looking at a 20-year time frame. So one absolutely needs to be taking into account these risks. Otherwise, the projects are not fundable and not bankable.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. There is a question here that I also wanted to ask. How do you see the interaction between ReFuelEU and European Union Emissions Trading Scheme? And I will add to the question also CORSIA, the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. I know we have a lot of experts here on ETS and have seen your CVs.
Yeah, but this is like the $100 million question. ETS is more about the user, whereas this ReFuelEU policy is more about the supplier. So I think they can coexist, but what's essential, and this applies equally to CORSIA, is that we have a common set of rules around what's, if you like, carbon accounting. And I think if you stand back and look at this from a high level, I think we're going to move more and more to a world where, just like in financial accounting, you have IFRS or the equivalent international standards. So also we need to move in the same direction with regard to carbon accounting. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to manage. It becomes you've got different schemes with different rules and regulations, and that's not going to help anybody long term. Just a reflection. Doesn't necessarily answer your question, but it's just a comment.
Definitely provoking my thoughts, Jonathan, which is great. Istvan?
Well, I think, having worked in the European Commission, the way I look at it, the ETS and the ReFuelEU is just the the continuation of the classic Brussels tradition of working in silos, you know, like DG Move is doing their own thing, DG Klima is doing their own thing. And, you know, I mean, in climate policy, we have seen this, you know, for the last 10 years or 15 years that, you know, there is the energy policy and there is the climate policy, and they are both sort of trying to achieve the same objective without much regard for each other, let's say, or at least sort of being annoyed by each other. And that's a bit, I mean, you know, the EU ETS is currently in the process of being expanded to fuels, to road transport fuels. You know, I mean, obviously the question emerges, like, would it have been so much of a stretch to bring in aviation fuel as well, you know, to sort of put it into the general usage? You know, this didn't happen. And, you know, I mean, those of us who know how the, you know, the Brussels system works, they sort of know why, but I don't think that that it would be possible to sort of give a very noble rationale to to what we see here. It's just the way it is. Like, you know, this is the kind of regulation that we in Europe are able to do. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit split up. I mean, it's a bit fragmented, but it gets the job done.
Thanks, Isvan. I spent 4 years of my life doing my PhD on emissions trading scheme and governance failure, so I know what you mean. Ardvil, do you want to add something to the discussion there?
Yeah, and just a bit regarding this, and also to the last discussion. We, I mean, in Europe, we have the Refuel EU Aviation and the mandate coming up, and there is quite a bit of whip, while in the US there is the Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits. So we also need to kind of look at the kind of international competition here. I mean, how will Europe kind of be developing compared to US? We need to see some incentives, and there is room for policy also on the supply side. And these new production pathways will have a higher production cost than the HEFA route. Would contracts for difference be an opportunity? With other policy schemes kind of be helpful in actually ramping production up as quickly as is needed? Just a question.
Yeah. Arvid, since I have you here, if that's okay, you have done a lot of work with Avinor on sustainability and also on SAF. If you could share some advice on how can or should airports support the implementation of SAF with the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, I could try to share. I mean, we've been fairly early on the uptake side. Back in January 2016, Oslo Airport was the first hub in the world to blend biojet into the fuel infrastructure using a mass balance principle, selling it to all the airlines tanking there. And we've also been early on the kind of knowledge development side. So I think one thing is kind of for us that's been important has been kind of showing it's possible and doing some of those early moves. And I guess looking forward, trying to contribute to voluntary kind of uptake on top of mandated volumes could be a priority. Trying to inform about SAF to the general audience, about the opportunity of SAF, and buying the extra cost is one thing, and also kind of trying to be a catalyst for increased production nationally, because there are so many different countries out there with different feedstocks and resources available, and different strategies need to be developed in different countries with different kind of natural given opportunities for this. Although we could have a big claim system working internationally and some kind of balancing in that, there is definitely also a possibility here for different countries for value creation and for employment connected to production of SAF. And could also mention that recently we hosted a SAF conference here in Norway with 180 participants, trying to kind of connect the whole ecosystem. for a full day program, informing about SAF and discussing the main topics about increasing production and uptake of that to get it higher on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Arvid. I take two words that struck me there: opportunity and possibility. So thinking a little bit about the future, we have the deadline of ReFuelEU approaching in 2025, and then we also have the commitments for 2050. So we're coming towards the end of the webinar. We have a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm very much hoping that many of the attendees will also attend the conference in Amsterdam, the Sustainable Aviation Futures Conference in Amsterdam, where those issues are going to be addressed in a lot of detail. So coming towards the end, I would like to ask the panel very briefly to give me their honest responses if they think that the industry is prepared to comply with the ReFuelEU, thinking of the deadlines of 2025 and 2050, considering the blending mandates. And if I can start maybe from Frank. Frank, what do you think?
Yes, I hope so, but I'm not the person to speak to the European sectors and actors. I see a lot of willingness in Europe. My constituency is outside Europe, and here I think it's very important to do this preparatory work, all the training, all the initial steps, so that those countries will be ready in 10, 15 years when we need the huge quantities. But let's hear the others if the Europeans are ready. I hope so.
That's a very important view, because we need to look outside of Europe for ideas many times. So thank you very much for that input, Frank. So I'm gonna maybe move to Jan. Jan, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So as one of the largest SAF off-takers globally, we of course, track many different suppliers and projects all around the world. And I think we have a rather comprehensive understanding of the capacities that are going to be coming online in the next couple of years. And I'm not so worried about 2025. I think we can make that work with biofuels, considering we already have blending mandates in France and in the Nordics as well. So I think we're on a good path to that. I'm having difficulties to really comment on 2050 because it's so far out. It's really difficult to estimate. I think it's certainly possible. It's just a matter of commitment here. And my biggest concern is probably the subquota of e-fuels, because this is right now really an immature market, and really need a lot of action behind these numbers to really get that going.
Thanks very much, Jan. It's very difficult to predict indeed the deal 2050, but definitely the industry is preparing. Istvan, what's your take on that?
Well, I would just generally like to say that, 2050 is something that we have to keep, reassuring each other, like the industry, the policymakers, the public, that we all believe in the 2050, because it's, if one of the cycles stops believing, then it can fall apart. And so I guess that, in that long term, it's more a commitment to a vision, to a belief than, saying, are we ready? Probably we are not in many ways, but, if we keep believing in it, then, there is a chance that it will actually happen. Or, but I think, so, in this sense, the vision and the belief will constitute the reality, hopefully, or otherwise it's not very nice for the future generations. So, I mean, I prefer this than the alternative.
Arvid, do you keep believing?
I keep believing. But I think we need to rush a bit. I mean, I think 2025 is manageable, as Jan also touched upon, but 2050 will be harder. But we need to rush to get the 2050 targets kind of manageable. We need to get the systems, reporting, everything, kind of the structures in place. And I think we need to start thinking about, what kind of volumes of electricity production will be needed. How can we kind of produce all that green hydrogen, for example? Will we need to kind of also move into to other colors of hydrogen, or will we manage the way the legislation is set up now? So optimistic.
Optimistic. Okay, great. I think also Jonathan is optimistic and preparing. Jonathan, what do you say?
Absolutely, and I agree with all of the earlier comments. I think we're all well aligned as different players in the ecosystem and are committed to the 2050, and this is part of the broader societal energy transition. But it's very easy to sign up to something that you may that is so far out in advance of us. And I mean, 30 years, you know, if we reflect back, you know, we probably weren't even using iPhones 30 years ago. We weren't. So a lot can change. But equally, we've got to set ourselves nearer term deadlines and milestones to get there. And that's the key. 2025 is not an issue. Neste alone can supply significantly more SAF than the EU and UK mandates will require. Quite the opposite, actually. You know, the issue is more 2030, and in particular beyond 2030. And Jan was absolutely right to say power to liquid. We've got an awful lot of work to do to bring eSAF on stream by 2030. But then we'll have, I think, the production technologies and feedstock sources to accelerate thereafter. The funding and investment behind this is key. The financing side has not been mentioned. It's all well and good for a Neste or for an oil major to put down $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion, but it's going to need hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's not just in the production, it's also in the renewable power. And green power, renewable power, great, but you actually need a base load as well. So, you know, wind and solar is not the whole answer. Nuclear may also be part of it. But so a lot to solve, but very confident. And really 2025 is not the issue. It's about 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jonathan. And we have been working a lot here at DCU on the policy for demand, supply, and distribution of SAF. And we are also worried about the 2050, but we do trust the industry that they will do what it takes to decarbonize. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. We had a very rich discussion here. I can judge it from the speed that the questions are coming, and also how eager the different participants and the panelists are to share their views. So please join me in thanking all our panelists for their valuable insights. We're going to be meeting many of them also later on in the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Harry. Harry?
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you very much, Jan, Arvid, Frank, Isvan, and Jonathan for some really fantastic points there. I think I really like the idea of commitment. Commitment is belief right at the end there. I think some really fantastic discussions, and apologies we weren't able to answer all of your questions. There simply wasn't enough time. We'd be here well up until Monday. Yes, I wanted to say thank you. Some really insightful discussions and very well poised to discuss further at Sustainable Aviation Futures Europe taking place in Amsterdam at the start of June. Have some fantastic support already. As mentioned, all of the speakers that you heard today will be participating, as well as some fantastic others as well. Really looking at 2 main conference days and a pre-event focus day to showcase some of the regulation policy workshops that are taking place, as well as really deep diving into aviation landscape, the policies landscape, and also sustainability strategies. For any further questions you have regarding the event, feel free to drop any of my colleagues an email with their emails on screen now. And if there's nothing else, I wanted to say thank you very much for everyone for their time today. Thank you once again to the speakers, and thank you very much, and hope to see a lot of you in Amsterdam in June. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.